everybody, and welcome. This is HerdCon's Book Chats, and we're here with a new episode. We're going to be talking about a local author in a not too far from where we are on the Marshall campus. Probably take about an hour, 45 minutes to go to get to Crum, West Virginia. This is Lee Maynard's notorious, legendary, memorable, it's a heck of a thing to teach in a class, his novel Crum. But before we get started, we have to tell you some disclaimers and trigger warnings. So my co-host, Megan Sexton-Harness, will explain all of those in an extensive litany.
So, I would first like to say that the views expressed in this podcast are not reflective of Marshall University, HerdCon, University Libraries, nor the English department here at Marshall. Secondly, this book is explicit. It was something that caught me off guard. If you are not prepared for sexuality and a lot of it, this book isn't for you. Maybe hold this one off for your kids. And finally, if you are an animal lover, this book does have some scenes that you definitely will not enjoy. With that being said, Dr. Lumpkin, how would you feel about Crum? I know you said that you've read it several times. We have some of the sequels here.
Yeah, this is part of the Crum trilogy that Lee Maynard wrote. One of Crum was 88. Scream of the Cannibals was 90. It was 4 years later, 92, and I believe the last one, The Scummers, was 2012. And you know, all these are published on Vandalia Press. Out of the first two novels were reprinted, and then the third one was published as part of the West Virginia University Press. West Virginia does do nice things sometimes, and their press is really good. I'll just leave it at that. Yeah, I mean, this is one of those books. I remember reading. I had it on a Kindle, and then I got a physical copy. I just remember laughing a lot at it, and it is a hilarious, dirty novel.
Yeah, it really took me by surprise, especially because the book is set in 1950s. It's the Korean War, and some of the things that happen in this book I didn't know were even thought about in the 50s, though it was written in 88, so maybe it's a little more updated. Fisting and golden showers. Yeah. I mean, I think too. We have this around this time. I don't know if anybody's familiar. There was something called Alfred Kinsey and the Kinseyans in the Kinsey Report. That I believe he was at. There's the Kinsey Institute, which is in Bloomington, Indiana, at the University of Indiana, and they had done a kind of a study and survey of sexuality and what they found. And I'd mentioned this in one of my students in a different class had mentioned, like, apparently they used a lot of incarcerated individuals to do this, but the study was very interesting in finding the percentage of which people had, homosexual interactions, had paid for prostitutes, had committed bestiality in some form, and it was very kind of revealing of how we thought, or how kind of the morality of a time presents itself, and what were we actually up to. I think, yeah, in a lot of ways, people have been doing interesting and curious things to fight boredom off for thousands of years. So I don't think this is anything new. For sure. I mean, if anything, if Lee Maynard here is accurate about the things that were happening, they were doing a lot weirder stuff back then than in my high school. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that he talks about how they have sex on the back of the school bus. As far as I know, that never happened on the school bus I rode. So I found that very interesting. Mm-hmm. But it also, I think, says something about Appalachia, because at least for me, when I think of 50s, I think of housewives and very conservative values. But here, the girls aren't being shamed for their sexuality. The men aren't being shamed. It's a much more open and more free world.
Mm-hmm. I think too, when you look at it now, as compared to what's going on, say, like the lives of today's teens. I mean, you just with social media and like anything you do that's going to seem weird or or something that's interesting enough to take a photo or shoot a video of, you're going to be recorded. We're being recorded right now as we talk about this book, and
you know, there's no worry of everything, all these things that they do fall into myth and legend, basically. You know, and there's scenes where characters are, and also should have a slight spoiler alert, because we're going to just talk about the novel as it is. I'm assuming that you've read the book, and if you haven't, it's still worth reading no matter how we talk about it. But it was there was basically a transactional scene where one character's like, if you do this silly, goofy stunt, you can do this to me for like 10 seconds or something like that. And it's like, but she's very specific. I only want 2 other people to watch. I don't want everybody to watch. So it's this kind of power and control that the characters have over their circumstances.
Sure, and I think that this book, even though it's a male author telling the story of a man growing up in Crum, really shows women as very strong, powerful beings, especially teenage girls.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he talks about the preacher groping the people as he's baptizing them until one girl comes along and really twists it to him.
I mean, yeah, I mean, this was, you know, and I think it's a weird thing, and this is a book, you know, again, it's a setting in the early 50s, and it reflects the 1980s. It's written in the 1980s, but you do see, I would say strangely, not in the way we would think about it in terms of, but there's a fair degree of consent that's going on in these things, and when somebody like the very terrible Reverend Piney, who is an awful hypocritical person, when he's bad, he's, you know, he set up his church, his Baptist, you know, church. He is self-ordained, so he doesn't have any proper education about, you know, scripture and rhetorical methods other than shouting and telling how awful people are and how they're going to hell. And yet he is baptizing young women, and it's just kind of, and he is just groping them very foully and non-consensually. And it very much, it seems like there is a strange, I have to admire the book for that, this respect for bodily autonomy unless somebody wants it or somebody agrees to have some act or something done to them. So.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, we see women specifically taking that bodily autonomy and that power and using it to get out of Crum.
Mm-hmm.
With Yvonne specifically, we have that one moment where, I guess, from my understanding, our main character loses his virginity. I was not sure because it talks about as if they do this kind of stuff all the time, but then it's also talked about as if it's like a rare treat to get to do these things.
Mm-hmm.
I was a little confused there, but he goes to give her money and she is devastated that this is what it was for him. So while I see the agency there, there's also this lack of communication that maybe they didn't have the words for.
Yeah.
They're 17.
If there is a certain degree of communication as far as a transactional nature of things, like a tit for tat, I did you a favor, you do me a favor, they're totally blank on any kind of emotional intelligence, which is kind of par for the course for teenagers. I think maybe some teens nowadays are a little bit better about that, but I remember when I was a teen. And yeah, you just do these things and you're a total dumbass and you break people's hearts. There's little things that are just thoughtless, things you say, and it's terrible and it's heartbreaking. And people still have scars from those things. Not me, I've resolved all my issues, the wrongs that have been done, at least in high school. But yeah, you just have it is like, and I think the narrator has, I suspect the narrator had lots of sex, actually, but he never had anything that was a kind of emotional connection.
Yeah.
It was just something that was quick and hurried and fun, and then we have Yvonne, who has, as a character, Yvonne is, she's wanting to get out of Crum. She figures out that she can use her body, basically becomes a sex worker, and is earning money to get out of town. And she hates it there as much as the narrator does. And there's a kind of commonality there. You know, I guess it's like the two brief moment where they come together and sexy stuff happens and stuff like that. And it's a nice passage up until he blows it completely. So yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, when we talk about Appalachian books and you're talking about emotional intelligence, a lot of Appalachian books are about wanting to get out, wanting to leave it, but that struggle of staying. And at the end of this book, we know, the whole book we've set up know that he's leaving. That's not a spoiler. He's leaving Crum. But even his friends don't have the emotional or verbal intelligence to express that they're going to miss him or that they're angry at him for leaving. They either block his car or they beat him up.
Yeah, and it's a lot. I mean, it is the, I've heard the place it's kind of the bucket of crabs. You know, have you ever heard that kind of analogy? This is the idea of places, and I've heard some people say certain places in Appalachia have this kind of aspect. Of course, you know, where crabs are not indigenous. Sea crab are not indigenous to Appalachia, but. The idea that you have a bucket of crabs and there's a crab that's about to make it out. It's like, no, you can't make it out. And then everybody brings that crab down and then, you know, someone else tries to sneak out in the crab. You know, it's just this bucket that you're not going to be, nobody's going to let you get out of it. And a lot of it, I think this is a novel that's aware of it. And I think when you have Maynard, who is very, on the surface, this is like very hilarious, obscene, and bawdy material, but it's really hiding a lot of insecurities and the failure to have any sort of vulnerability. That it's a little bit like I was talking earlier. It's a little bit for references. It's a little bit like Versailles under the rule of Louis XIV. That it is this kind of hermetic, sealed-in place where courtiers and courtesans are basically trying to get one up on each other, and the king's like is enjoying it because, you know, people, if you ridicule someone and embarrass them, they lose face and it's shameful, and it's all this back and forth. And while there's no ruler in Crum, that is that same kind of activity happening, that everyone's trying to get one up on other as far as like esteem, as far as stuff they can show off, but also not wanting to embarrass themselves at any point. So it's a lot of these scenes where people are trying to control and manipulate things, but also not to lose face at any point. Which it feels very high school to me, you know.
For sure. And you talking about saving face, it makes me think of all of the other Appalachian books that we've read that are pride is bad, don't get above your raisin. But in this book, we see multiple times of people go, no, that's all I have.
Yeah.
All I have is that I'm the best pig killer. All I have is that nobody else can beat me up.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a really interesting turn from Appalachian novels, is that, no, this is a book full of prideful people. But it's not a bad pride.
No, I mean, yeah, I mean, if you are the best pig killer, or if you're the best swimmer, or if you have, you know, or if you're the high school girl that everybody wants and you want to illustrate that constantly, there is a power in that. I think it is that kind of small fishbowl kind of thing. This is it is Crum unincorporated. There's no infrastructure, but there is like I also kind of wonder, and the times I've taught this novel and talked about it in class, it's a lot of students. Some of them from Wayne, like, there's nothing in Crum. What a sad place. But even people in Wayne County, which is the county next to us in Cabell County, are just like, oh, those poor people, they've got nothing to do in Crum. And I remember I taught this book in maybe 2018 in the fall class, and the students a lot of them were like, well, there's nothing in Crum, but they do have a new school there, and they really needed it because there was a whole, like the world's largest outhouse apparently was being used, so there's no plumbing and sewage, and so all of these things that make life tough. And you think about after World War II, that sense of some places getting passed by, and something that like what do people have in Crum if they're looked down upon by all these other places in the surrounding area? You know, this is just a spot on a map that you pass through. So there is that sense of pride and integrity, but it also is very fragile, you know.
I will give Crum this. About 10 minutes outside, obviously not in Crum, but in Kermit, the best pepperoni rolls I've ever had.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, I made that drive. I was going to Pikeville. I wanted to do like a loop. I wanted to buy a guitar at Mount Music Exchange. a lovely little place to get musical equipment. And then we drove down the big 4-lane on the Kentucky side and then drove back. And it's like, I have to drive through Crum at some point. And I was always like, it was slightly bigger than I thought it was going to be after reading the book. But then again, it didn't, I don't think there's a restaurant there. There's not a beer garden. But there was a nicer new school there. There was that. I mean, it is a very small place on a highway between bigger things.
Yeah, for sure. My husband's from Mingo County.
Okay, yeah.
So anytime we'd go visit his family, we'd take that road and drive all the way through Crum.
Mm-hmm.
And we always loved Crum because that meant we were halfway there.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it is, and for non-Cabell County, Marshall, Huntington area, Wayne County folk, there's from what I've heard from people who live here, it's a more recent, something that's popped up in maybe the past 20 or 30 years. There's the kind of Wayne, out Wayne, way out Wayne. And it seems that Crum is on the, like, as a county, Crum is like a big long, Wayne County is like a big long tube that goes, it starts at the Ohio River, or ends at the Ohio River, however you see it, and then it just runs along the western edge of West Virginia. And it goes on for quite a while. And then Crum's at the very end, which seems to be beyond, it's way past way out Wayne. You're at the end of the line.
I actually think
Crum.
here at the main front, we see the Wayne County, Mingo County line.
Right there. And so there's that location. So yeah.
So, and I think that's a nice touch, kind of giving somebody a map.
Yeah.
At least a little bit so they can see.
And and this was the book. It has that, it's a topographical map, so you see the elevation changes and you can kind of see just the nature of the geography in that area, that everything is these, I guess, they're the hill, they're these kind of lower hills, but everything's kind of packed in. And so there's not, unless you're going to start, again, although we're not fans of blowing mountains up, that seems to be a popular activity in Central Appalachia for various industrial reasons. And pretty much anything you want to build on a hill, you're going to have to, flatten it. But it is this kind of space that is very kind of hemmed in and tight. And it is a suffocating, the book makes it like a suffocating space.
Sure. And then at the end of the book, if you read this version, it does not really explained, but the author gives an afterword. Not in character, it's the actual author talking about his experience. And he talks about the mountain being blown apart, and yet the way he describes it, it's still suffocating. It wasn't the mountain suffocating them. It was the people themselves, and now they're so tightly packed in that it's still suffocating even without the shadow of the mountain.
Yeah, and it has that, it is often like, what is the, I think about like, what is the thing that drives you crazy about a place? Is it the weather? Is it the geography? Is it the is it just the community? And sometimes like eliminating certain things make you realize, well, that wasn't the problem.
Yeah, for sure. And I really like that ending because Homer Hickam kind of talked about it, that once you leave, you're an outsider now. Mm-hmm. And so we get Lee Maynard being a voyeur in his own hometown. Nobody knows him anymore, and we know in towns like this, it's all about who knows you. Not who you know, but who knows you. Yeah. And so I thought that was a really powerful moment. Him sitting in this new diner, and no one knows him, but he might know everyone there without realizing it.
I will say, I have a great deal of sympathy for this growing up where, I grew up in North Georgia, in a county, in a town, and it's just, this was before social media, so, I was one of those lucky kids. But man, just whatever, I would do something, and it would get back to my family in some way, and it was like made into some sort of tall tale. That's like, no, that was not the case at all. I went to a party and they said, and I didn't drink anything, but I went to a party and then, he drank 5 tequila shots and fine. Like, this never happened. And I'm just like, that kind of stuff makes you want to leave a place.
Yes.
Which is exactly what I did. And, just movie where they're like, maybe the people are the same, but they don't have that kind of like, you're one of us kind of thing. I do appreciate being, I think it's helpful to be a little bit of an outsider in places sometimes. Yeah.
For sure. My dad, when I was in elementary school, he moved around a lot, and he would always tell me, but I still know people. They'll tell me what you're up to. And it was like, oh, okay. Good, lucky for you, I'm a good kid.
Yeah.
I'm doing anything.
And you know, this is like the setting is the characters are just bored enough to do interesting things, if that makes sense at all. That if they were in a more rural space, then they would do, you know, farming or whatever, that they would, since also there's I think there's something, although this is an adult novel, there's a fantastical aspect that we think about coming of age novels, particularly of boys and, you know, teens, is that I had no chores. Like, woohoo! You know, that they're just like left to their own, they can be feral and left to their own devices as long as they're not breaking the law too much. It's totally fine. Like, just you know, there's nothing there. There's nothing at his house. There's no video games. There's no social media. So they just go out and do stuff to pass the time, in a sense. And I feel like that's one of the things. It's like, I don't know that this is the case for you, but like, I'm never bored anymore. Like, I'm just like, if I'm either gonna like lay on the couch and act like I'm sleeping, or I'm gonna do something. There's never like, but when you're a kid, you just have passages of time, and probably because like time seems to go by more slowly when you're younger. This is just a sad fact. And that when you're, you know, I just remember being bored a lot when I was a kid. Were you bored a lot when you were a kid?
Yeah, I think so. But I think I would still get bored now. I'm like, okay, I've flipped through these same apps like 8 times. I'm gonna lay here and pretend to be asleep. I do the same.
But yeah, it feels like, you know, you at least have like, well, I'm making a choice to be bored, whereas you feel like boredom is something that's put upon you. And there's nothing to do, and they have very little money, and the lovely little schemes that they make up to try to make money.
The meat train theft.
The meat truck theft, yes, that was hilarious. And the ways in which the characters, the novel does a really wonderful job of setting up how, like, they do get meat, but it's mostly not the best cuts, or it's pork, which was very common in rural spaces. The thing with a pig is you let the pig go everywhere, and then you have bacon at the end of the season. It's a magical creature. But they talk about like having some like beef, some kind of roast that was, and that idea of actually having like good meat is such a thrill to them. But then they so overcompensate by gorging themselves constantly. They're like, we can't just have like a nice steak. We need to have like 200 pounds of meat that we can't eat it all. And it is just like overcome, over desirous, and it's wasteful, but I understand.
I also like this book because it really feels like it's a book with no repercussions.
Yeah.
Like, I don't feel like they rob a meat train. That's fine. The guy who blows up an outhouse. That's fine.
Just then somebody else blows up another outhouse to cover for the previous crimes and the accused. So yeah, I mean, it certainly, I think, on a, like, it has that boys will be boys kind of thing. It certainly does that. But I think that plays into its kind of tall tale, kind of mythical aspect of it. I generally feel like that everything did not happen to the one particular person in this place. And you know, some of these events, they get told and they get retold and they get streamlined and they become legends almost. And so that's what it feels. It feels a little, but I think the emotions of the book are really, really, they're right, and they really catch that sense of being a teenager, which I think particular to Appalachia, but also they have a kind of very universal connotations.
Yeah.
And having the rhythm of the book is set up as seasons, so you start summer and then goes back to like summer, fall, winter, spring, summer, and you know, for those of you who have gone through senior year in high school, I don't know if this is your experience, but I've got this sense in some other, like, you're kind of excited about fall your senior year, but by the time spring rolls around, you were like done with everything. You just want to be out. Like, we just end this?
Senioritis, I have that every spring.
Yeah, there's always like an enthusiasm for, like, all right, here we go. We're gonna turn over a new leaf, and they're like, let's just get this over with. And it feels like that. I really enjoy that kind of, whether these events were true or not. And I really don't care. This is a work of fiction. that it gets these kind of emotional resonance really right, I think.
Sure. Speaking of the seasons, that was one thing I found interesting about the book. We go through a whole year, and I think that the main character is only ever in school the one time to get their diploma. I don't think there's ever maybe one other mention of them being in school.
They talk about playing football, which is like the only time they get to go out of Crum.
That is true.
And they're like a really ramshackle football team. If they were out in Wyoming, they'd be playing 7-on-7. That kind of football. If you're familiar with that one, towns that are so small they don't have enough to field a football team. They have literally leagues in like western Nebraska, Wyoming. It's 7-on-7. So it's basically like a quarterback in the center, and everybody's like a wide receiver. So it's a particular type of football. But yeah, they have like 14 players and 13 uniforms, and everybody's got to switch stuff out.
11 pairs of shoes.
Yeah. And he the wonderful thing in that, the one thing that he remembers is they would play a game, and then the Coach Mason, who's this very, someone who's a teacher, yes, he's a wonderful teacher, and he's fighting the good fight, but he takes them to restaurants afterwards. And it's this experience of like, you can get all the rolls and they'll refill your sweet tea, and you have to behave, like chew with your mouth closed kind of stuff. And to me, at least, and maybe it's my sense of it, so much of this a lot of these stories feel like stories my dad and my uncle, who were twin brothers, told me all the time of whatever hijinks they got up to. It's something that feels a lot. Maybe that's a personal connection to it, and why I think it resonates with me. But it sounds like it's stories of a bunch of guys shooting the breeze and having fond memories, but also complicated memories about growing up.
I normally wouldn't tell this story, but it seems fitting with this book. So I met my best friend in the 5th grade, and it wasn't until after we became best friends that we realized that our families had been best friends for generations. Mm-hmm. That's how I found out that my grandfather could pee over a 10-foot fence.
Oh, wow.
Apparently that's what they used to do for fun.
That is impressive.
So I don't know. So these legends are definitely still a thing. And why do they always involve urine or defecation? Because it's funny.
Yeah. This book is very scatological. As the fancy way, it's about pee and poop.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
Every chapter.
And again, this is I believe there was the book called Everybody Poops. It's something everybody does. Again, there are all these outhouses. And it's a creative section about one outhouse that was on wheels that would move a little bit whenever they were done with a hole. And there's also, I think, when a space has such limited material, like they have the creativeness, I appreciate their ingenuity at times.
Sure, I think my favorite outhouse in it was the one that they hung over the river. And it was just a hole, and they were like, send them my poop to Canova.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just like, that's so environmentally bad. But yeah, I mean, that was probably something somebody did. Yeah, it's just, it's the Freudian disavow, like, I don't have to think about this anymore. It's someone else's problem.
I think in good news, if someone listens to this podcast and they haven't read this book before, they might be very well prepared for what's in it.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. I came to it like, it was one of these things like, yeah, this Crum, it's an amazing novel. And believe me, I think there's a value to dirty stuff, to literature that is about dirty things and filthy and nasty stuff that we have, but it is something that is there, and you don't want everything to be this, but I think it does exceedingly well for what it is.
Yeah, I was never bored reading this book.
And it's a beautifully written book, and I think it has that kind of conflict between there's things about this place I love and things about this I hate. Like he hates the place, but he tells such loving stories.
Huh. And I think that, I don't think we've talked about it in this, but we've talked about it in the past, that Lee Maynard considered this actually a love story to Crum.
Yeah.
That this was his love letter. And this is the weirdest love letter I have ever read, but yet it makes sense.
Yeah.
There at the end where he's talking about how I can't stop. If I stop, I won't leave. Mm-hmm. I have to leave now. Like that immediacy, and I think that's something a lot of Appalachians feel, because it's not that a lot of Appalachians want to leave. It's that they must.
Yeah. And I think too, I think to be okay with people who want to go somewhere else too, that Appalachia, the people in Appalachia should represent a spectrum of people who want to go out, and people who want to go back, go do things and then come back. There's a wonderful, in Stories Ain't Told Nobody Yet, Joe Carson's series of monologues. There's one where she's talking about, this one monologue, it's a woman who's talking about her brother, and her brother's been living out in California and has a California wife, and she's like, but the mountains call most in your middle years, and so he longs to return home to the mountains of central Appalachia where he's from, and so, you know, it's bad to deny how you feel about things. I mean, also I think if you leave somewhere, you find out what the problem is, which is often the problem is you. You know, you learn things about yourself by going other places, and I don't think that's a bad thing at all. But some, you know, oftentimes, what are the things that make you miserable? You look in the mirror. That's usually the number one culprit. If you're not being abused or you're not in a violent situation or something where you're controlled. But yeah.
Yeah, I can say, growing up here, my one goal was to leave West Virginia. And then I moved to Huntington, and I really felt at home here to the point of I'm terrified of planes. But I recently went to New Orleans. My flight back, I was just like, please let me see my mountains again. I ached for home, even though I was in New Orleans. Yeah. And it was a very strange feeling for me, but it was the closest I think I'd ever come to feeling like one of the protagonists in these Appalachian coming-of-age stories.
I mean, I think it is that sense of poignancy and the sense of nostalgia. There's an episode in Mad Men where Don Draper talks about nostalgia. It's like it's derived from this Greek word, this kind of old wound that someone has. It's the pain you feel. So there is this kind of poignancy. You're like, oh, you long for it. It's a past of a place that's no longer there. Like where I grew up in, I don't know, just hammer this home. But also like I grew up from a different place than here, so I can kind of I don't feel like this seems like a place. This feels like some people I knew in my life growing up, and I don't feel like it's. And believe me, there's a lot of work out there in movies and TV that shit talks Appalachia and people in the South and things like that. But this doesn't feel that way as much. But when somebody that looks back on a time, that time is lost. It's a different place. They're different people. There's new stuff and there's different stuff. I've often think like Huntington. Huntington probably was a pretty happening town in the 1950s. Like the downtown was bustling, lots of little theaters, like big department stores that have 5 levels and a soda shop at the top or something like that. And it's just different now. And things are not the same, and things stay the same, and things change.
Still probably weird.
Yeah. Huh?
Still probably weird though.
Yes, we're definitely, yeah. I mean, I do feel that there's like a lot of books, and I can name them. Like Lee Smith's Oral History, the Devil's Dream, and certain Denise Giardini novel where it's like people like crap on Huntington. Like this is where the character has their lowest point. They're in a flop house in Huntington, West Virginia. There's a lot of like little but here like, oh, we went to Huntington and played a football game, and it was such a big place,
I can say I moved to Huntington in 2014. I only live 2 hours south, and oh my gosh, when people found out I was moving to Huntington, they'd been, oh, please be so safe. Yeah. It's so dangerous. I've never, knock on wood, had a bad thing happen to me in Huntington.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So Huntington's the big boogeyman, but it's also the place. It's really where things happen.
Yeah. And this is a it seems kind of strange because what I wonder about is what is the point of Crum? Why does it exist? And I think it's something the novel like why is this thing here? Was there some business there that was of value? Was it important for trade, for commerce? There doesn't seem to be anything other than it is a stop
on the bus line, or it is a stop on the train.
Coal mine.
Yeah. But even then, like, the coal mines are some distance, like, Maddie, basically the second or third cousin, it's unclear, he was one of the caretakers for the narrator, that he's driving a fair distance to get to a coal mine. So you're in a place that is coal country, but there's not any kind of coal mine right around there. The old number 7 that he talks about said, well, they've got new jobs for the narrator. If you want to take a job, you can get a job there.
I did really love that part where he points out that, like, in the West, their mines have nice, cool names. In West Virginia, they're just numbered.
Mm-hmm.
They don't need names.
Yeah, it feels very, even if the company created the name, that it feels very uncreative. It's the old 27 or something like that, or even like fun names, like it's the new 69 or something like that. It seems so arbitrary and I don't know quite the word of dehumanizing of a place, but it has that kind of anonymization to it.
I think you make a good point, because the only mines around here that I know that have names only have names because there was a disaster there.
Yeah.
And I'm like, did you have a name before the disaster, or is this the humanization of the disaster?
Mm-hmm.
They didn't die in number 12.
Yeah. They died at Upper Big Branch,
Yeah.
or whatever space. Yeah, and it is something also. It is where coal is very on the periphery of it, but it rears its head at the end.
Yeah, and I think we could also argue that in a way the narrator is his own little coal miner. Their little stint in the river,
Yes.
the shiny coal.
Yes, the shiny river bottom coal that everyone is fighting over.
But
Yeah.
they want it as a decoration. They don't even want to burn it.
Yeah, I guess it would burn pretty clean because it had all the dust off of it, so if you had to burn it. And yeah, and it's hilarious because you have these West Virginia kids and these Kentucky kids fighting over trash in the river, basically. And it just shows, like, how, and this is something that the coal company doesn't really care about. They don't mind if just stuff falls into the river, which is polluting the river, keep in mind. It's the Tug River is a very nasty river as depicted in the song, but these are like young kids and they jump into it. But it is, and then it is these little scraps that these characters really throwing rocks and shooting guns at each other to get. Again, you see in its way the kind of the corporations, the aftermath, the destruction they cause, and now you have the people fighting over the scraps at that point.
I saw a meme recently, and it was like, there's no greater hatred than the two states that are 20 minutes away from each other.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh yeah. Living here in Huntington, Ohio and Huntington people have their little hatred. It seems like down there it's Kentucky.
Yeah, it's really pretty silly. Or, where I grew up, I just always thought that I lived like pretty close into the state, enough to where it was like it would take a couple hours to get, but it was always like the people north of us, they were uncouth and uncivilized. And the people south of us, closer to Atlanta, they must have been huge snobs. And we were the only people that were reasonable people. Now I realize how much BS this is, but it feels like you're the norm, you're the acceptable, and everybody else around you is a freak and a barbarian.
I was thinking that it's just reversed in West Virginia. We're like those Morgantown, D.C. panhandle people.
It's true though. Morgantown at least. But anyway, we're not here to rant about Morgantown.
But I'm glad I'm here.
Yes, I'm glad to be in Huntington and glad to be working at Marshall. Yes, so I dig this place. So, yeah. Jeez.
I don't know if I have any more thoughts. I mean, I'm sure I do.
Mm-hmm.
I just...
Yeah, I think, and to make this a little clear, this is part of a trilogy. I've read all 3 novels. I think Crum is by far, in a way, the best one. Just in terms of like, here, we've got to recommend books for you. I would definitely suggest reading Crum, being aware of all the stuff that we've warned you about and just hearing our conversation. I think Screaming with the Cannibals, the sequel, is a significant step down from the first book. And one of the weird it does interesting things. It literally copies a lot of passages from the first book, as if
Maynard isn't confident. Like, he actually is sort of telling an interesting story, but it's like all these reflections on the first novel really get in the way of it. And he's a really good writer. And I think the Scum, it's a little bit like the Back to the Future trilogy. Like, the first one's a classic. The second one is disappointing but interesting, and the third one's pretty good. The Scummers is a pretty good novel, and I give him credit. He is no longer with us. He has passed away. He's been dead for several years, but he tries to do different things with each novel, and I appreciate that when artists don't try to do the same thing over and over again. So, credit to that. But I think, yeah, the classic, the 5-star, one of my 5-star good reads is certainly Crum by Lee Maynard.
I don't know. I think I'd give it a 4 just because I was so shocked.
Oh, I mean, I don't. Maybe I'm just used to this stuff. I don't know.
Like, I was like, okay, 1950s, like, and then, oh, 1950s.
People were into weird stuff. They were. It only gets weirder, and they were into some wacky, wild stuff. And so, yeah, this sounds like, and I think too, it feels very grounded, but it also plays into a little bit of a kind of teen fantasy of being unregulated, of not being controlled, of being kind of feral and doing your own thing. There is no parental. I guess this is nowadays we have it so much where we want to control the lives of children as much as we have managed, and that has its. I'll just say that has its advantages and it has its limitations. And then letting them just be out and feral and doing whatever and fending for themselves, that has its advantages and limitations. What is the balance? I'm not one to decide these things, but I think there's a balance somewhere where you can give kids freedom, give a chance to explore, give a chance to mess up things, but then also like not just have them be like basically roving bands of vigilantes. Yeah, so yeah.
I'm glad as a child-free person I don't have to find that balance.
Yes, no, that is but I think it's an important conversation that we need to have as a society at some point. Yes.
I did think about one more point I would like to draw about this book that I think is different from almost every other book we've read in Appalachia. There's no politics in this book. There's no union. There's nothing. I didn't pick up on anything political. There's no Democrats, Republicans. Nobody's coming to visit. They're just living.
Yeah, and there is the religious aspect of it. It seems like going to church is just something that you do, and everybody gets baptized at some point.
We don't really pray. It's just there.
Yeah, it does seem very much. I think it is uncomplicated. I think it's something that respects the perspective of, although I think in a lot of ways it is the perspective, the writer, the persona is an older person looking back, but it respects the vision that a teenager in a small place like that would have.
Sure.
It's something that is overlooked by everybody else, and it is a way of remembering that space or that time period that it takes place in. So yeah, you don't see, there's not, I don't know where you would vote in Crum and who represents this group other than some businesses and places where houses are, and yeah, they are kind of overlooked and forgotten. It feels like it, and again, I think that leads it to the kind of legendary kind of mythic space where it takes place in. So
For sure.
So.
I feel like, at least in the book, it's a place that could be anywhere, but it could still only be in Crum.
Yeah. It gets that sweet spot of where you feel. I think you feel a lot of kind of universal associations to it. Just something that feels like childhood, feels like those friends that you also kind of your friends and frenemies, and growing up and all of that stuff feels very like relatable. And yet it is very much in a specific place. So I think it's specific, but it has these kind of associations that create it from it. I think that's what good writing and good narrative does.
For sure. All right. Any final thoughts before we wrap this one up?
No. If you are a sensitive reader, perhaps, but if you enjoy a good romp. A good filthy romp. This is a novel worth checking out. And if you're interested in Appalachian literature, and I'm always interested in what people think about the novel. So please, you know, we usually have this, we'll post this on YouTube. If you have thoughts, please feel free to share them in the comments section, which should be open. And I'm always curious to do that. Because when I'll teach this book, and like I'm making people read it, but someone that would want to read it of their own volition, I'm always curious about that too. So
For sure. And before we go, I'd just like to say our next book and the last of our Appalachian season will be Loving Mountains, Loving Men by Jeff Mann. And then we will have information soon about season 2.
Season 2, excitement, anticipation. We've been working a lot on season 2. Don't want to spoil anything yet, but we're going to go in a different direction, and hopefully in an exciting way. So
I'm excited.
I'm excited as well. Take care, everybody. Be well.